Alright, so this is Till We Have Faces Part 4, the final section. This is Anne Fields, Jenna Minnelli, and Megan Sproul.
Okay, so we're going to start out with overall opinions of the book, which we all are pretty much in agreement with. It was a little bit anticlimactic and disappointing at the end, especially with all of the excitement in the previous podcast of just talking about the summaries and oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And we were looking forward, especially to the interesting choice of narration that this is Auril, who is the sister, and not Psyche, which the story's supposed to revolve around. So we thought that would have been an interesting part of it, but it turned out in this last section to be a flaw of the book itself. And something that we also talked about earlier was that how would already having a knowledge of the myth of Cupid and Psyche affect your take on the book. And I think I'd have to say, without actually looking up the myth, I would be horribly confused in this section, because it does start talking about Psyche's exile at the very end of the book and all the trials that Ungit made her go through in her path to become a goddess, which was kind of reflected in Auril's nightmares. Auril had nightmares of these trials, and I recognize that, actually reading about the myth and knowing about it, I recognize those as the trials, but for someone who was not familiar with the myth, these passages seemed really rushed, and I would think that they would be pretty confused.
As someone who just had a general idea of the myth and didn't actually look up specifically about it, I was confused, but especially in the part at the very end when they walked along the wall and the fox showed Auril exactly what everything meant, I was like, okay, so I understand that these are the trials Psyche went through, but I didn't understand the relationship between I guess when he was saying beforehand Psyche bore some of your burden and then afterwards you bore a lot for her, that just, it didn't make sense in the whole outline of what was going on.
Overall, I pretty liked the book. The ending could have been a little bit better, but I liked the book overall, and I'm obsessed with Greek mythology, and I love Greek mythology, so obviously I love this myth. And it's just, I thought it was a very, very good take on the myth. And I thought that he did a good job, even though the ending wasn't it was very rushed, but I thought it was pretty good overall.
I think it definitely makes you question at the end, at least, and maybe that's what C.S. Lewis was trying to get at, because there are metaphors that he used and phrases that he used, for example, the entire book is Till We Have Faces, and one of the quotes in the book says, that you cannot meet the gods till you have faces, which, at first, upon initial read, what does that mean? And then throughout the book, she's talking about the common theme of, am I Auril or am I the queen? And then she later finds out that apparently she's Ungit too, so am I Auril, am I the queen, am I Ungit? And I guess those were, kind of her faces, and I don't think that's necessarily saying, oh my gosh, she's all these people, but more, maybe metaphorical of, personality-wise, maybe metamorphosis throughout tough times or challenges and stuff like that. Something that we talked about in an earlier podcast was the whole idea of losing your innocence, and maybe that's part of it, because Psyche kind of had a different personality when she lost her innocence, so maybe that would be considered one of her faces, and same thing for Auril when she decided she wasn't going to obsess over Psyche so much anymore and she took on her role of the queen. She really had a different personality. It kind of changed her a little bit for the better. So I think that might be a common theme throughout the entire book, that he's going to drop these ideas that are confusing at first, but maybe if you talk through them and question them, make a little bit more sense.
C.S. Lewis is a very metaphoric author, because I've read all of the Narnia books, and he was very, very metaphoric in all those books. And I think overall, your thoughts are like pretty accurate. And I think he was trying to get at that metaphor that we all have different personalities and different faces, and making these characters more real.
Along with that, the reason that he uses the line, the actual title of the book, "Till We Have Faces," is when Oral is kind of on trial against the gods, and it says, "Till that word can be dug out of us, why should they hear the babble that we think we mean?" So one of the other interpretations of like the different faces is which one of them is like the true face, and which are some of the faces we create fake, and are they covering up what we really are thinking or what we're really doing?
You could even tie that in back to, I feel like it was podcast 2, I think, when they took Psyche up to the mountain and gave her a different face, to kind of make her look different and feel different, appear that she was brave when she actually was scared. So along with that, like, what mask do we put on for the world kind of thing? Like, is that the real us? Are we hiding? But another thing that I was confused about, because like Anne and Megan, I'm particularly fond of Greek mythology. I'm not diehard fan, but I did read the Percy Jackson series. I don't know how much credit that gives me. But one thing, I've read a few myths too here and there, but one thing that I have seen fluctuate throughout each interpretation is like, are the gods good? Are they bad? Are they angry? Are they human? Are they, stuff like that. And so this book, I was confused on that take on it, kind of. And it could have been something where, like, from one god to another god, it was, this god is good, this god is bad, but it kind of felt like they all clumped together were very two-faced in a way, that they were like, oh, we're going to put you on trial, but, oh, we're going to answer your question, we're going to do this for you. Like, it was a bit indecisive, in a way, and maybe that was also intentional, but it wasn't clear-cut, like, throughout the story. Like, at the beginning we were led to believe that they were so awful, and at the end she came to the conclusion that, she admitted, I hated them at a time, but now I've kind of put that to rest.
And I actually do think that was intentional, because in all of the myths overall, like in Homer's myths, you don't know whether the gods are bad or good. Like, you can't tell. Like, some of them, like, they are very, very two-faced. Even the people in ancient Greece couldn't make up their minds. Like, they didn't know whether their gods were good, or whether they were trying to help them, or hurt them, or punish them.
When the ancient Greeks created these gods and goddesses, they may have done that. They probably did that intentionally, because no human is all good or all bad either, so they were probably creating the gods and goddesses to reflect something from within themselves. And so that little bit of ambiguity, like, are they good, are they bad, kind of just goes to show, like, how goes to allow the humans to relate to the gods and goddesses that they created.
We're going to go ahead and do a rhetorical analysis of a paragraph. So, this is the paragraph. "Who is Ungit?" he said, still holding my hand. Then he led me across the floor, and a long way off before we came to it, I saw that mirror on the wall, just where it had always been. At the sight of it, my terror increased, and I fought with all my strength not to go on. But his hand had grown very big now, and it was as soft and clinging as Bada's arm, or as the tough clay we had been digging, or as the dough of a huge loaf. I was not so much dragged as sucked along till we stood right in front of the mirror. And in it I saw him, looking as he had looked that other day when he had led me to the mirror long ago. But my face was the face of Ungit, as I had seen it that day in her house. "Who is Ungit?" asked the king. "I am Ungit." This kind of whole thing in general, from what we were talking about a little bit before, it was also symbolic of the title itself, Till We Have Faces, that this is one of Oral's faces, and something that we had talked about last podcast was Oral started wearing her veil, and that became
kind of a really big theme throughout the book that, you know, we originally thought maybe she wore it because she was ashamed or in mourning of Psyche or stuff like that, but later she wore it because she felt like it hid part of herself, that when she wore it she didn't feel like Auril anymore, she felt more like the queen who led her people. And then there were like huge rumors across the town, like what is under her veil and stuff like that. Is she a monster? Is she like this beautiful woman or stuff like that? But in the very last scene before she is accused by the gods, she decides to take it off so that she can kind of walk around disguised, because everyone knows her as the veiled queen, and so no one would recognize her kind of barefaced, as she said it. And so when she did meet them, she didn't have her veil on, and so that's kind of the whole entire, like, she met them when she had faces type of thing. But anyway, sorry, commercial break. Back to the paragraph. This is definitely, well, the context of this takes place in one of her dreams that she has, and that's kind of a common theme that she has throughout this entire section. She does have her nightmares, like she was going through the trials with Psyche and stuff like that. But in this dream, definitely, it kind of separates away from the whole nightmares that she was having before. Whereas this one is kind of, she wakes up, she doesn't really know if it really happened or if it was a dream. The other one, she's pretty sure she can separate them, like that was a nightmare. And this one, she's not sure. So again, it kind of like goes back to her faces and background of the myth, and something that we talked about is when Psyche goes on trial, Aphrodite or Ungit kind of takes her in and really like makes her a prisoner, kind of tortures her in a way, sets her on all of these different ridiculous tasks and says, well, if, you know, you do this, then, you know, I won't do this to you anymore. And so Psyche actually passes them all, no matter how cruel Ungit was or how ridiculous and impossible the task seems. And so in that way, bringing that full circle, like, was Auril the one who caused Psyche the majority of her pain? And thinking back to past passages, especially the part when she makes Psyche go in and take in the lamp to the god of the mountains bedroom and stuff like that, that definitely caused the spiral of a lot of Psyche's pain, and that could be tying it into that.
I think also it's important to like put in context that there's more around this paragraph where Auril kind of resists her father taking her down farther, and she kind of resists going any farther because they're traveling downward into the earth, and before she's experiencing this, and she resists finding out who she actually is. I think, well, metaphorically, I think it kind of represents her not necessarily wanting to look in the mirror and see that she's Ungit, not wanting to realize exactly what she comes to realize in the end, that she may have caused Psyche a lot of her pain. So I think that the fact that she kind of fights against her father a little bit represents how it's hard to look at yourself from the outside and see exactly what you've been doing, whether it's good or bad. It's hard to look on without a biased opinion, and she's scared to look in this mirror because she knows what she sees she may not like.
And in this dream, kind of going back to what actually happened with this dream, she's visited by her father, who is dead, and he kind of takes her to the pillar room, and they keep digging and digging and digging into, and they keep finding more pillar rooms under the ground, and in the final pillar room, he leads her to a mirror, and he's like we just read, he asked her who is Ungit, and she realizes, she sees in the mirror that she is Ungit. And I think that's really like kind of like the turning point in her mind throughout the rest of the book, that she keeps battling with this fear that she is Ungit, and that she has to face the reality that she did cause Psyche a lot of pain, and she was the one who tortured her. She did play the part of Ungit.
And I think what makes this passage kind of relatable in a way is she does mentally regress a lot within the passage, where, before she was talking about how after seeing the god of the mountain, she's no longer afraid of the king, and becoming this queen. She has a heart for her people, but she's kind of seen as like fearless, and she'll do anything. And with this dream, when her father comes back to her, she regresses back into the feelings that she used to have around her father, that she's scared of him, and terrified of the temper that he used to have, and how he would take it out on his children. By looking at the paragraph, she describes people who have died already. Like she's talking about her father, not only on like how she's afraid of him, but she goes back to her nurse, Bada, and she's dead as well. And Oral was actually the one who ordered her hanging. So she's going back, and she's realizing that in the passage before this, like, oh, well, Bada was nice as well, and I think she's kind of seeing the faces of other people in this passage as well, and she's kind of realizing that like, for Bada, she always thought of her as a horrible woman and awful, and then she realizes, well, before Psyche came, it was kind of, that she was nice to me, and I did see that. And she also does that with her sister Redival, where this whole entire book we're led to believe that Redival is an awful person, that she's just really ditzy and horrible to Psyche and stuff like that. And she realizes that, oh, I was horrible to Redival when the fox came, and then when Psyche came, I continually ignored Redival. So this passage itself is like Anne said, the turning point in her mind, that she starts to realize not only her own faces, but other people's faces that they put on. And so I think this is a really important passage as a whole, very metaphorical to the meaning of the book.
I guess this is a rhetorical analysis of description of setting. And this is the paragraph. I was walking over burning sands carrying an empty bowl. I knew well what I had to do. I must find the spring that rises from the river that flows in the Deadlands, and fill it with the water of death, and bring it back without spilling a drop, and give it to Ungit. For in this vision it was not I who was Ungit. I was Ungit's slave or prisoner, and if I did all these tasks she set me, perhaps she would let me go free. So I walked in the dry sand up to my ankles, white with sand to my middle, my throat rough with sand. Unmitigated noon above me, and the sun so high that I had no shadow. And I longed for the water of death, for however bitter it was, it must surely be cold, coming from the sunless country. I walked for 100 years, but at last the desert ended at the foot of some great mountains, crags and pinnacles and rotting cliffs that no one could climb. Rocks were loosened and fell from the heights all the time, their booming and clanging as they bounced from one jag to another, and the thud when they fell on the sand were the only sounds there. Looking at the waste of rock, I first thought it empty, and that what flickered over its hot surface with the shadows of the clouds. But there were no clouds. Then I saw what it really was. Those mountains were alive with innumerable serpents and scorpions that scuttled and slithered over them continually. The place was a huge torture chamber, but the instruments were all living. And I knew that the well I was looking for rose in the very heart of these mountains. Where this takes place in the story, it's in one of Oral's dreams.
This is one of, it's describing one of Psyche's trials that we discover later. Psyche's job is to be able to get a cup of water from the River of Death, or in the Greek myth, it's the Styx River. And so Oral kind of embodies that and almost becomes Psyche, and she's seeing all of this through Psyche's eyes.
The passages that we really picked out do really represent turning points of the story. For example, this one, being one of Psyche's trials, is kind of very representative of what the god of the mountain said to her before, when she went to Psyche and told her to bring in the lamp, and then chaos ensued. She saw the god of the mountain. He told her, "You will be Psyche," and she had questioned that throughout the entire this entire passage, like, how would she be Psyche? Does that mean that she's going to die, or does that mean that someone's going to come kill her, or does that mean that she's going to go on exile as well? And this part really hit the nail on the head hard of what does it really mean to be Psyche, and she's going on these trials with Psyche, doing the hard work for Psyche, as the end of the book kind of made it sound a little bit, because the paintings on the wall, as Megan was describing earlier, really showed, here is Psyche just going in, something was helping her, she didn't know what, but the task was pretty easy for her, and we knew from previous experiences and previous passages that the thing that was helping her was Auril. So, yeah, I mean, we could also go rhetorically to this passage as in tone. It just shows how daunting, how scary the entire process was, which makes the final scene, when we see Psyche succeeding, that much more satisfying, because we see in those passages how happy she is when she succeeds, and that kind of makes up for it a little bit in Auril's mind of like, oh, I had to go through all of this horrible thing, but at least Psyche is happy.
Another thing with the passage, because it describes like the mountain that she's going to, it kind of puts a picture in our heads of something that's very hard to imagine otherwise, starting out with describing about how they were serpents and scorpions all over the mountain, and later on Auril realizes that they're not scorpions and serpents, but they're actually the souls of, or the souls, if you want to say that, of people who have died, which kind of goes with the whole theme of the book, that like people have different faces and it's not always what you see, and just like this mountain wasn't what Auril thought it was in the beginning.
And also the point of her, keeping in mind, because this is a later passage than the dream that she had with her father, like who is Ungit, that part, it's still very fresh in her mind that she is Ungit, and she's trying to figure out, well, how do I get rid of the Ungit inside of me? And so this passage even gives that much more of an impact to the end when she finds out that this was actually Psyche going through the trials, how horrible she is describing it, thinking that it's her going through it, and realizing later that it's Psyche, and also realizing that she's Ungit, she's the one who made her do this. Kind of shows you through this passage and through her description how deeply awful this thing is that's resting on her mind constantly, that she constantly cannot figure out, and she's trying to figure out how to get rid of Ungit inside of her. But we know from context later that the ethos is accurate in this passage, because it actually is one of the trials that Psyche went on. However, at this time, when we are reading it, it kind of seems like maybe it is just another one of her dreams. So it's a little muddy in that sense, especially, we have supernatural dreams and stuff like that, and the fantastical happens. So even going past to previous dreams that she had of trials, we know that she described them, and then she woke up and they were all dreams. So in this sense, even though the description is so vivid and accurate and kind of scary, I personally didn't worry for her in this passage, because it was a dream. So there's that. But then later on we do realize that it was real.
I think the fact that this is taking place in a dream, or that we first learn about this and it's a dream, not actually what's happening, kind of helps its logos. It makes it more believable at first, so that when we go back and find out that it's real, if they were to start off by saying that this was real, we may not believe it right away because it doesn't make sense. But by putting it in the context of a dream, it helps the reader in understanding and helps the reader accept it more easily.
And I think that adds to the pathos too, because you can almost feel Auril's pain throughout this dream, even though we know that it's a dream. I mean, it almost adds to her sense of despair, because later we learn that she is going through all of this as Psyche did, and she's feeling all the pain that Psyche did, so that Psyche could go through the task without any pain, so to speak.
Okay, so our last one is a rhetorical analysis of a speech given by a character, and this is a speech given by a priest that Auril meets later in another town, and realizes that the temple is for her sister Psyche. So I will skip the paragraphs in between the speech, and so try to give it as best of a whole speech as I can. Now I will tell you the sacred story. Once upon a time, in a certain land, there lived a king and a queen who had 3 daughters, and the youngest was the most beautiful princess in the whole world. And so he went on, as such priests do, all in a sing-song voice and using words which he clearly knew by heart. And to me it was as if the old man's voice, and the temple, and I myself and my journey, were all things in such a story. For he was telling the very history of our Istra, of Psyche herself, how Talipal, that's the Usurian Ungid, was jealous of her beauty and made her to be offered to a brood on a mountain, and how Talipal's son, Ilum, the most beautiful of the gods, loved her and took her away to his secret palace. He even knew that Ilum had visited her only in the darkness and had forbidden her to see his face. But he had a childish reason for that. You see, stranger, he had to be very secret because of his mother Talipal. She would have been very angry with him if she had known he had married the woman she most hated in the world. And so, he said, when her 2 sisters had seen the beautiful palace, and when they feasted and given gifts, they... Stranger, you are hindering the sacred story. Of course they saw the palace. They weren't blind. And so, the priest was saying, when these 2 wicked sisters had made their plan to ruin Istra, they brought her the lamp, and they wanted to destroy her because they had seen her palace, because they were jealous. Her husband and her house were so much finer than theirs. So that is the interpretation of how everything had happened to Psyche, that, like we had said before, because Auril is the narrator, everything is going to be word of mouth that she's going to hear, and this is a prime example of how word of mouth gets a little distorted. And this really makes Auril angry.
Very angry.
Primarily hitting on the points where he says that, and like I said before, I did skip some parts in between, but primarily hitting on the parts where he says that both sisters went to the palace, and she's like, Auril did not, Redival did not care about Psyche, I cared about Psyche, so I was the only one who went to the palace. Also, the part where he said that they saw the palace, which we know is not true. And also the part where he said that both of the sisters wanted to ruin her because they were jealous. Whereas we know that Auril wanted her to see the god because she was worried about her well-being and who she was really laying with at night. So this is also a turning point that we had found in this section where she realizes that she's going to write everything down in spite of the gods and how they would create this horrible story that made her look bad, which is the whole entire reason why we have this book. So, in a sense, I mean, C.S. Lewis is the reason why we have this book, but...
Yeah, I think it's especially interesting in this passage, looking at it also with the end of the book, how much her mind has been changed in between. Because in this passage, she is against the gods by all means. She will not believe them. She thinks they're evil. She thinks that they set her up, that they made her look bad. And she has a reason to. I mean, when you look at it in this case, you can see how she would be angry with the gods and how it's not fair that this story is being misrepresented, but she can't do anything about it. It's easy to see where she's coming from, and even though this entire speech that we're talking about isn't coming from Auril, we learn a lot about Auril in the speech because it shows a side of Auril that you can't see when she's looking at herself. And it kind of also gives the reader something to think about because there's a conflict here between Auril's story and the priest's story. And we know what happened from Auril's point of view and that they didn't actually see the palace, but we don't necessarily know if the reason that Oral went up to the palace is because of jealousy or because of her love for Psyche, or maybe it's both. Maybe she really wanted Psyche to come home, but she also was slightly jealous that Psyche got picked instead of her. So I think the fact that this entire speech of the book that we just read is being told from a different person helps the entire story in that way.
The tone, as Oral described it, was a little bit sing-songy in the priest way, which I find it kind of funny that is coming from a grown man and he's kind of reading it like a child. But that's also very, symbolic of kind of children in a way that children are very impressionable and will repeat anything that their parents say. And so that's pretty much how, this whole entire story is going to go down pretty much. As we know, like before Homer and all those guys who actually wrote down the myths, everything was just word of mouth. And so the same thing's going to happen here, that this is the priest, this is the guy that has the authority of the town. If this is the story that he knows, this is what everyone's going to know. And it's frustrating for Oral because perhaps, maybe it was just the fact that, yes, it was wrong, but also, like Megan said, maybe it painted a picture of herself that was true, that she didn't really like. Which she really wants to get rid of and why she's writing the story. But yeah, I think tone is definitely symbolic in that sense, that as to how the rest of the story is going to carry on. But we can also feel the pathos of Oral, even though Oral doesn't really have much interactions or interjections throughout this paragraph. We can really feel her pathos, and as readers ourselves, who have learned to trust Oral as a reliable narrator, it's kind of frustrating to read because, we're made to question, like, did we get the right story, or did Oral really tell us the right story? Is this the right story? And so it is frustrating, since it is in first person, wanting to take Oral's side, that we're kind of made to defend her a little bit in this passage, that, that's not how the story happened.
And I think the priest obviously has a lot of ethos within his community because he's the priest and he has the most authority. But Oral also has ethos because she's the narrator of the story, like you had just said. So we're not
and
really...
she experienced this firsthand.
Yeah, and she experienced this firsthand. And we're not really sure which side to take because of both of those battling ethos.
And it's also something like, we know that this is the turning point where she said, okay, I'm going to write the book. So we, from the beginning of the story, we want to believe Oral as soon as everything happens, but because this is the particular point that she writes the book, we don't know. Maybe that was true. Maybe that whole entire story was entirely true, and she's just twisting our leg to say, actually, I'm going to write it from the beginning of this is actually what happened. And we also know from this passage, she said that long spans of time have passed, and as traumatic of an experience as this has been for her, there may be bits and pieces that she doesn't really remember. So being human, she wants to paint herself in the most positive light that she can. So when going back to the beginning and writing this, maybe she is just combating what the priest said to make herself look better. So, I mean, that is an interesting take on it. We don't really know who to believe, but just the fact that she said, I'm going to write my book right after this happened, maybe it was the truth and she didn't really want to hear it.
Yeah.
Which especially comes into play at the end when she then meets the gods themselves and starts to question herself even, which makes the reader then question everything that she's written.
I think we've touched on a lot of parts that really give a full rhetorical analysis of the book, and I feel like we've done a good job with our 3 passages tying them into, okay, this is why it is significant to the book as a whole. And like we said before, I think really the whole entire intention and meaning of the story is the title itself. Till We Have Faces. How do we present ourselves to people? Although it was a fun interpretation of the Cupid and Psyche myth, it is also very relatable and human, like we've been talking about in other podcasts.
And it's kind of all the way throughout the entire book, we see the repetition of the Till We Have Faces. How can we find ourselves? How can we find our true face? How do other people see our faces? How can we trust people who we don't see their face? For example, how can Psyche trust the person she's sleeping with at night if she can't see his face? And even though we're looking at the same thing, we can see things differently. Oral looks at the mystery person, or later God, that Psyche's sleeping with, and sees a burglar or a person who ran away from home. She sees all these bad things, and Psyche sees a God, and then Psyche can see the palace and Oral can't. It's all different ways of looking at the exact same thing.
I think that the gods could be a representation of kind of like a full trusting relationship in a sense, because her part that she said that tied in the title of the book said you can't see the gods until you have faces, and that to me really relating it from a human perspective. You put on faces for other people, but the most intimate and trusting relationships that you have are ones where you are completely open, that you're not afraid to show the other person your other face, where you don't have to be, okay, here's just my happy mask, or here's just my sad mask, or here's just my one personality face. With the relationships where you really start to maybe get closure and like trusting in a sense is when you are willing to show all of that. And I think that's when Oral decided that she wanted to get closure, and she wanted trust, and she wanted things to be fixed, and so she had to accept all parts of herself before she could find out that the big shebang.
Yep, I think that's it.
Okay.
So,
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. If we get bored over the summer, look for other podcasts. But overall rating, out of 10, I would give this a 6. Only because I am the type of person who is very like stickler for endings, and I felt like it was kind of anticlimactic, which is disappointing because up until that point I enjoyed it. But so my final verdict is a 6. But
I'd probably give it like a 7.5. Maybe.
I'm going to go with a 7 or an 8, somewhere around there. Main reason for points off being the ending, but there was a lot in the book about people, and I really liked that.
Right. Well, thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening.